Let's have a look at our reference image. You've got light through a narrow street with interesting patterns. And we look at the shadow shape, for instance. You've got these hard yet broken edges coming from this building over here. Then you've got this soft light, and this soft light is coming from the light streaming across, hitting this wall and reflecting back into it. And then you've got the figures moving into the painting rather than out of the painting. So it's just a lovely scene. Let's start by wetting the back of my paper. Let's now mix some colours. So for the beigey areas, just some raw umber. And the other brown areas a bit more reddish, so I'll just start with some dirty burnt sienna. So my dirty burnt sienna is just whatever's sitting on top of that burnt sienna. Add a bit of raw umber to it. And what we're painting with this at the underpainting stage is really the lightest tones. And that's fine for the darker areas of the building. And then for the ground, it's a sort of cool greyish colour with hints of warmth in them. So we'll just get some cobalt blue. A little bit of permanent rose and burnt sienna. So now I'll just give this some more water. Let's start with our lightest areas first. Stairs. Now, the lightest area is actually this girl's top, so, but in her case, we just paint around the shape. Even her jeans are so pale, we'll paint around that. I'm going to throw some of this over here, but without a lot of paint in my brush, so that I still keep some of these lighter shapes. Just like that. Now you can see there I actually painted a little bit into that step because it's in shadow anyway, and I wanted some of that step colour actually to flow down into the footpath. I didn't want this to be like a perfect flat wash. I wanted some of these other colours to flow into it and to create some variation, because really all of these paths in Venice have got bumps and things in them. What I'll do, just get some raw umber, plenty of water in my brush. Just tint that. When I look at a colour, if I'm looking at this wall, my first thought is, okay, it's a brown, and it's a warm brown. So my next thought then is, what is my warmest brown in my palette? And that's burnt sienna. So we'll start with some burnt sienna. A little more water. So first I work to get the colour right. So we've got burnt sienna, then get some French ultramarine, because this is too bright. The blue being the complement of orange, and burnt sienna is like an orangey brown. That takes out some of that brightness. Some permanent rose. For something like this, you don't have to get it exact, right? We're not trying to colour match so that someone can paint that wall. You know, I'm going to lighten that. Because this area is the most distant part, by painting it early like this, I can work on these side tones adjusting the tones relative to this distant area. Just going to drag some of this paint over here and add some French ultramarine to it. Because quite often underneath these windowsills and that you get some discoloration. And we've got some here. Down here. And these shapes just help break up a fairly flat plain shape into something a little bit more interesting. That will do there. Later we'll go in and put the pipe in and maybe some more sharper details. Then here we've got these brick shapes. They're a little bit lighter. I think I'm going to add some raw umber to that mixture. And later we'll come in and just hint at one or two bricks. While that's drying, let's now look at other parts of this scene. And here we've got this very dark window. For that, we'll mix some burnt sienna and French ultramarine. So this already has some burnt sienna and French ultramarine in there, but we need to make it quite a bit darker. But I don't want it as dark as in the photo. Let's get a smaller brush. That's a fairly flat shape, but in reality there'd be some other colours there. Pick up a bit of this cobalt turquoise. Oops. With some of this burnt sienna, I think I'm just going to just put a couple of dabs there. You can hardly see them. See how I've just added a hint of this other colour there, just so it's not a dead flat shape. We'll now work on the stairs and the figures. Let's do the side of this bridge first. So it's a brown, lighter in tone than this area here. So we'll pick up some of this colour. It's a bit warmer than what was there. But a bit lighter in tone, so I'll add some water to it. Let's have a look at that. Bit of Scarlet Lake. And you can see how I've left little areas untouched, and later we can go and put a bit of a shadow there just to give the impression of peeling mortar and things like that. I'm going to pick up just a tiny amount of this darker colour with some of this other paint that's already on my brush, and just run it down that edge. Even up here. This will do two things. One, it will camouflage the pencil mark, but also add a bit of aging to the structure. These steps, they're a lighter colour. Let's get a bit of raw sienna. So this is just very weak raw sienna, a little bit too warm for this shape. So whenever you think, oh, it's too warm, okay, how do we cool it down? Well, we could add some blue to it. If we add the cobalt blue, it will tend to turn this a bit greenish, whereas French ultramarine, because it's what we call a warm blue, it's got a bit of red in it, well, if it does lean to the green, it'll be a very, very dull green. Good. It's got to be stronger in tone. Got a bit too much water there. Now that is leaning a little bit to the green, so I'll just grab a tiny bit of permanent rose. That's the colour I'm going to go with. Now this area here is in shadow that's cast by this building here, but I'll do that at the end. So right now I'm effectively painting these stairs as if there's no additional shadow on them. Now, if you look at the stairs, let's zoom in on the stairs, what you see, the light bits are the flat sections, and then these vertical bits are the darker sections. But you also, along the edge there, see how it's a little bit darker still. So what I'm going to do is very quickly pick up some of this dark colour, move it over here just to dilute it a bit, and then drop in some of that. And that helps add a bit more texture to the stair rises. So when I'm dropping in paint, what I mean by that is I'm going into wet paint and then just touching it. More texture as the stairs get a bit bigger. Again, I'm varying where I put the marks. And if I find there's a pencil mark that's a bit too dark, I'll make sure I put some of this extra dark paint there. I'm just going to go and dry this. We've got a line in here. I'm adding a bit more detail than what I intended originally. That happens sometimes. There's some brown timber. There's something that's got a bit of blue in it. So I'm mainly looking at tones and approximate colours. So here there's a shadow under there, so I'll just go in. I just mix some French ultramarine and burnt sienna. So I'm just hinting at what's going on in this window shape. And then we've got this little pot plant. And I'm going to lift a little bit of that colour. And I'll get some cad yellow with a bit of cobalt turquoise. Very little water in my brush. We'll just hint at some green there, that's all. Shadow at the bottom of that green. You don't want a lot of detail there. The good thing with the cad yellow is it tends to push other colours away, so you can go in to an area that you've already dropped maybe a darker colour in and it will push them away. So the louver is a dark brown. So again, magic word is brown. I've got some brown here. Let's make a drier part of my palette. Add more burnt sienna to it. More French ultramarine. Within that, there are some darker areas still. Thicken this mixture with a little bit of extra blue in the ratio of paint. Got to be careful I don't go too solid with this, because even though I know it looks quite dark in the reference, if I go too solid it'll want to jump forward. So I'm just going to lift some of that paint. I wanted to square that up. Just get that so that I'm happy with that shape, because there's a bit of a more of a soft edge above this white edge. Clean my brush and just turn this around, take out about 3/4 of the water and then just run it along that edge, and then that will just create a soft edge. Here there's a bit more of a shadow. I'm just going to put a bit of this creamy colour here for this veranda. So I'll use some raw sienna for a start. And a bit of French ultramarine, just to dull that off. And because these are sort of rails, you'd see a hint of the other side of this sort of window. But just a hint, so I'll just put some colour there. There's even a little bit of green. And we'll let that dry. Okay, so quite happy with that. Not happy with this sharp edge. Just soften that. Let's look at these figures. Oh, and we've got this texture here. Just mix some shadow colour. So here I'm just going to use some French ultramarine and a tiny bit of permanent rose. A little bit of burnt sienna. And we run it along the top edge of some of this peeling mortar. Great. This is one of those cases where less is more. You don't want to overdo it. All right. This girl, she's got brown hair. Drop in a bit of dark. That's good enough. This girl has darker hair. When you're doing hair, you've got to be careful you don't end up making it too regular, and you don't want to make it too big either. I'll let that sit there in a minute and then I'll lift a bit of a highlight. And she's got a black top, so for that, just some French ultramarine and burnt sienna. This is where you find things that are wrong with your drawing. One good thing with hair, however, is you can give someone some more hair and help balance the shape of their figure a bit. It's pretty good. She's got grey trousers or leggings. And there's a shadow on those leggings. I'll add that as a separate step. Because I had her drawing wrong here, I have to fix up the stairs a bit. Which is not that difficult. Now, this person's hair is probably dried, so we can do that. She's got a white top on, so she's going to have just a shadow. Maybe just some French ultramarine, tiny bit of permanent rose. Always leaning to the blue, however. And add a bit of cobalt blue as well. That's better. And she's got quite pale skin, so I'll just get some of this brown here, add plenty of water to it. There's a little shadow underneath her sleeve. Just adjust that edge a bit. Bringing the shoulders down a bit, I've got them a bit too high. Just soften that edge. Now this person need to lift a highlight on her hair. Just lightening her trousers. And you know, this is probably good enough. By lifting that paint, I've sort of created a highlight, so I don't need to go back in and add additional shadow, I don't think. We'll see. And her bag is quite a light brown. So again, I've got this brown colour here. But the bag has got more of a tan look to it, so I think I'll warm it up with some raw sienna. And a little bit of Scarlet Lake. It's got just a hint more red in it. It's got some shadow on it. There. Bit of a highlight here. Darker down below. Okay, I think that figure's fine. Let's finish this person off. She's got some pale blue jeans. For that, we'll just use some cobalt blue. And then we look for some hints of dark bottom of her shoe. Just a bit darker along here. Pockets. Part of the problem I've got to solve is I've got strong pencil marks in an area where it would have been better to have a bit of light, but I'll resolve that later. And we're going to get some raw umber, tiny bit of Scarlet Lake. I'm going to redo her flesh tones, make them a little bit warmer. They were disappearing into the background, that's all. And her hair needs to come down here a bit more. Now, I would have liked it to have slightly longer sleeves, so what I might do, I'll see if I can lift some. Otherwise, I can adjust it later once it's dry. And a bit of gouache would be the final solution. That's better. It's amazing how much time you can spend just getting these little details right. I'm happy with the figures. One more thing, let's finish this railing here. So it's just a grey colour. So my go-to grey colour is usually French ultramarine and burnt sienna, and then depending on the paint consistency and how much blue or how much brown, I can have warm or cool or dark or light greys. I can tweak this when we do the rest of the building. Great. Okay. So now what I want to do is just very quickly add a little bit of detail to these buildings. Basically, my process for painting something like this is do an underpainting, and that underpainting is based on the lightest tones in the subject, then put in some detail, and then tie it all together with a big shadow wash at the end. So here, we've got the doorway and the windows. I want to paint some of those in now. So most of the doorways are quite dark. So let's just mix up some French ultramarine and burnt sienna just to get us started. But if you make your colour too blackish, it looks unnatural, right? Unfortunately, photographs tend to over darken some of these darks, and it can look black in a photo, but in real life it would not be black. So here I've got a dark colour, slightly warm. You can just sort of see a hint of the brown in there. I'm going to mix another colour here. So with the mix I had there that was on my brush and the brown that we used for this area, it's given me a nice brown that I can use on some of the bricks and things like that over here. So that's useful. So when I'm mixing colours, I always look at what's already in my palette mixing area to see if I can just modify that, right? But primarily this is still, in the main, French ultramarine and burnt sienna, leaning more and more to the burnt sienna than the French ultramarine. One more here. And this is just a thicker mix, a little bit more French ultramarine than burnt sienna, but also thicker as well. And if we have a look at that, you can see how this is a warmer dark grey and this is a cooler dark grey. That gives me just some nice variety when I'm painting some of this detail. So let's leave that brush there with that. I'm going to mix one more here. There's some little areas up here that have more light on them. They're still in shadow. So for that, I've mixed another brown, and it's really just burnt sienna and raw sienna as a mix. So we'll start with that up here. You want to do this pretty quickly because a lot of it is going to disappear when we paint the shadow. It's a lighter version over here. Now, if you have trouble drawing these lines, just a couple of things. One of the things you can do, if you're more comfortable drawing a line this way, you can move your board around and draw a line that way. Okay, it's a bit too there. If you still have trouble, you can get a ruler, hold it at an angle like this, rest the ferrule on that ruler, and draw a line like that. Okay, whatever helps you create a better line. This wall's a little bit too light. I'm going to darken it with the same colour that I had there, but much diluted. It's a bit too dark. That's good. There's lots of texture on this wall. I don't want to get into drawing all the brickwork. What I'll do is I'll just throw in some loose marks. See how quickly I'm covering this shape? Remember, we're going to have a dark shadow over a lot of it. And I've left more texture as I've come forward. Get size 8 brush. I'm going to just add a bit of splatter there. Good. I've just diluted this colour here. Probably diluted it too much. Let's darken it a little bit. And this doorway's lighter still because it's got more light in it. I saw these rectangles here and I thought, oh, that might hint at bricks or something. So I was happy to leave that like that. Oops, wrong angle. Remember the vanishing points there, so all these brick lines have to be headed towards it. And that'll do. I don't want to get into throwing in a lot more detail there, so that's fine. Let's work on this side. These windows are even darker still. So this dark area, I've mainly used this cooler dark colour. And in part that's because this side is receiving less light. Whereas here we've got a lot more of this light happening. So I've used the warmer and slightly lighter tone, darker colour here for that. What I'm not doing is painting in some of this fine line for the wires and that. I'll leave that till later. Don't really know what this is, but I think it's a window, painted as a window. Leave a few little bits of untouched paper that might act as a light reflection. Later, when I do a big shadow over this, you'll see how these little dots turn out. I'm purposefully putting in quite a ragged line there. A lot of these shapes will merge with the shadow. This wall has more warmth to it. Even though it's in shadow, you can see more of the reds and that in here. So I've got this brown, but I want to add a little bit of Scarlet Lake to it. I don't have to over mix it either. Well, that's a bit too dark, so I'll just drop some water in. And I'm going to throw in some raw sienna as well. This gets a bit darker down here. Remember, I'm still going to have to put a shadow over this later. Just noticed I missed a window. Okay, now let's get some splatter happening just to create some texture on this wall. Not over everything, Joe. So sometimes I'll pick up a totally different color. Like here I just threw in a bit of cobalt turquoise just to contrast to some of the other colors. You won't see much of that, but when I do come to paint the shadow over it, it'll just add a subtle variation. And even now you can sort of see how I've got, this is already darker than this side here. So I'm making sure that there's going to be plenty of light here. I want to add a bit of texture on this road there. It's a cool blue-grey colour. Now I've got all this grey here. I'm going to add some cobalt blue to it. Again, I'm painting very loosely, big brush, big shape. I'll vary the colour. Bit of reflected brown over here. It's a bit too dark. Just going to add some water. There's a few little hints of light on the path. If I come back here, so these little shapes, that's what I'm doing by leaving a few of these untouched areas. Again, there's going to be a big shadow that's going to run over all of this later. I don't mind some of these colours bleeding into one another. That just helps connect the wall to the ground better and also adds a little bit of reflected light. Probably can't see it very well from the photo, but if you look closely, you'll see along this edge, the colours just have that subtle warmth to them, and that's reflected light coming off this wall, or in some cases maybe this wall. That's why I'm happy to have colours run into one another. Apart from the fact they just make the painting look more interesting anyway. This is still not dark enough. This area here needs a light shadow, and that will push it further in the distance. And then we've got this really dark shadow mass here. On this side, it's primarily just a graded wash. Very weak shadow here, getting very strong. Here, the road probably doesn't need a lot of shadow here, but getting darker as we go through here. The road has some blue sky above it, and that blue sky is like a big light in the sky, and that's also why I could see a little bit of coolness in this area, right? The blue from the sky is lighting this part of the road. And then here we've got all these lovely, some soft, some dry brush strokes, and I'll show you how I tackle that when I get to it. So I'm going to take a moment, before I dry this, I'm going to mix some shadow colours. I'm going to mix a lighter tone for the distance and then a stronger tone here. So I'm going to clean a couple of parts of my palette. Probably doesn't have to be that clean. So if we look at the big shadow, it's going to cover at least half of the painting. So we need plenty of that, and maybe not so much for this one here. But shadows, I always overmix. Start with some French ultramarine. A little bit of permanent rose. And just a tiny bit of burnt sienna. And if we have a look at that, you see how dark that looks, but when we actually test it on paper, it's not very dark at all. So let's add more paint. Probably the biggest mistake people make when they're mixing this sort of shadow colour is adding too much permanent rose. And that's pretty good, I think. That'll do for our dark colour. This will probably do for our distance. I've got enough paint there to get started. I want to go and dry this. That's good. And it's still sitting reasonably flat, so I should be able to get through a lot of this painting without needing to re-wet the back. So I'm going to start with this distant shape. That's the lightest tone. Very quick. Keep that leading edge wet. And now let's push that into the distance. Don't want too much light there. And some of this railing would have light on it. I'm going to do the steps. The shadows on these steps are going to be a little bit lighter still because they've got light coming down from the sky. So let's add a couple of brush loads of water. And this girl has a shadow on her, so I think I'm going to do that. And then the steps. These shadows get a bit stronger, so I'm going to just pick up some of that paint. There's reflected light on these steps here, so that shadow is not as strong. I want a little bit more light on these. That'll do. I'll end up adding some extra shadow on these steps here when I do the walls. Let me go dry that. I have to dry it because if I try and paint the shadow here, this shadow colour will bleed into that. So, be right back. Every painting is different. When I look at this area here, I don't think this needs any real shadow colour there, so I'll keep that in mind. But it's a soft transition from no shadow. Obviously it's in shadow, I've just already painted that shadow shape. But I do want some shadow over this. So what I'll do is I'm going to get some clean water. I'm using a size 16 brush because I want to paint this quite quickly. And I'm just going to wet this leading edge. There. Then I'll go into the shadow. It needs a bit more burnt sienna in it. And now you can see I wasn't too worried about what was happening here before with your previous wash. There. Bit of a shadow here. Just dry this. There's some light here I want to lift. There's a bit of a weaker shadow here. Good. Okay, and then I want to strengthen some of these shadows here, especially this one. These two have a bit of reflected light, so I'm just softening that. Okay, now we've got the roadway. I'm just going to wet that edge. I'm leaving the roadway till the end, which is why I've just wet that just to keep that area active. Get a brush with reasonably clean water, and here and there I'm going to just dab some areas. Splatter a bit of water there. Where the shadow hits this, I want it to blend in with the water and hopefully give me some nice variation of edges along here. Here we've got some sort of shape that's straight. Just a decoration, I think. And this is in shadow. Bottom bit's got darker shadow. Solid mass here. I'll get my fan brush. And I'm not trying to be too accurate in terms of the shapes of the shadow shapes. I'm just trying to come up with the feel of this foliage. Vary the colour and tone a little bit. This is a tricky time. This paint's still a bit damp, and I'm going in with quite thick paint. Just giving these shapes here just a little bit more form. So I'm creating sort of softish shapes. Probably a bit too dark now. Good, all right. I have to mix more shadow colour for the path. A little bit of French ultramarine, maybe a bit of cobalt blue as well. Some burnt sienna. It's good. Just dilute that paint to this distant area. Plenty of paint in my brush. Now, quite often where the building meets the ground, it's a lot darker there in some areas. Doorway can be darker down below. Now the only problem here is I've got a straight edge. That's where I wet that before. I would have done better wetting the whole roadway. Now I'm going to have to just alter the texture of my path a bit. Just going to break that up a bit. I'm not happy with this here. For whatever reason, it's drawing my eye to it. So what I'm doing now is I've just sprayed it with some water so that it's all of a uniform wetness, and I have to go in and adjust that. The main thing is I just don't want that line to appear to be a definite edge. The texture I have here, I've got to spread out a little bit. I'm just lifting a few areas just to add a bit more variety here. I think when this dries, I'll probably throw in a few of these harder edges for the pavers. That'll do. You can see how wet I've made the road when I went in to fix it. So just so that you don't have to go through that, when you do this wall here and get to the ground, just wet the whole road. So that way it will stay an even wetness. And then you can paint this side and then you can do the road. So I'll just go dry it. Just going to grab some French ultramarine and burnt sienna. We don't know what all those wires are doing. So now I'm just hinting at shapes without worrying too much about detail. So it's a contrast of the dark against the light that gives you the light in the painting. Okay, now just do a little bit more work on this path. The main thing is to get these lines all heading in the right direction, perspective-wise. It's good, and just enough to hint at them without getting into the detail. And I've got a few lines up here, I don't even know why I put them in. I've only just noticed that this shape here that I thought was just some decoration is actually a window. So let's put that in. Just darken it up the top a little bit. These need a little shadow on them. We should put that in, and any grey colour will do for this. With a painting like this, normally what I would do is I'd put it aside and go and have some lunch and maybe have another look at it in the afternoon. It's a bit harder to draw these straighter edges when the paper's cockled. I don't know if this is really that important. Just going to make one or two small adjustments. This girl's trousers have a bit of a shadow there. And a bit of a shadow there. This girl's trousers could also have a stronger shadow.